Welcome everyone on our 54th author interaction under Trends Literature Series. And I'm Neeta Aneja, and I'm the founder of the platform Trends, which is a platform for art, cultural, social, and literary experiences. Today, in fact, we are going to talk about a new book which has recently been launched by Westland Publications. The book is Hitler in India, the untold story of his hatred for the country and its people. In fact, the book tells you about Hitler's views on India and Indians revealed for the very first time. So I'm very, very happy to introduce the author of this amazingly readable book, Hitler in India, Mr. Vaibhav Purandare. It's definitely a very, very well-researched, comprehensive and readable book. Vaibhav this is not his first book. He's been writing books. He's written a very nice book on Savarkar. Then he's also written on Pal Hektarse, and he's also written a book on Sachin Tendulkar. He's also a senior editor with Times of India. So welcome, Vaibhav, on our platform. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you, Neeta. Thank you for inviting me.
I'll dive into the questions straight away because we also have an interactive round after my Q&A finishes, and I already have the interactive round audience with me. So your book, Vaibhav, in fact, is highly accessible. It is quite rich in detail, and it's in fact the very first examination for what India meant to a figure which remains alive in the country even today. So how did you get about writing this book?
I was reading Adolf Hitler's autobiography, Mein Kampf, which is a hugely popular book in our country. Whether you go to a roadside bookstall or a highly reputed bookstore,
yes,
you will find Mein Kampf more often than not prominently displayed there.
Absolutely.
When I was going through the book, I noticed certain remarks that Adolf Hitler had made about India, about Indians, and about the Indian struggle for liberation from British rule. And I was taken aback by those remarks because I had often discussed Hitler with my friends, with colleagues, with associates, and never had the issue of Hitler's views about India in his autobiography come up for discussion. So I wondered to myself, how is it that nobody has noticed all of this? And how is it that all of us have missed these remarks that he made? Importantly, the question that arose in my mind was there more to it than this? And that impelled me to look into the archives. And I delved into the archives in Germany, in India, and in England. And to my surprise, I found that Hitler, right through his highly controversial political and military career, had spoken on numerous occasions, in fact, regularly, about India and Indians and what he thought about Indian culture, Indian civilization, and Indian society. And I felt that all of this material was lying hidden in the archives. And we weren't aware of any of it.
So right.
We had forgotten this important part of Indian history. We always talk about Winston Churchill's opinion of India, of Indians. We often quote him on Mahatma Gandhi and other Indian leaders. But hardly ever or almost never do we quote Hitler on Gandhi. And as my book reveals, Hitler said a number of surprising and very baffling things about Mahatma Gandhi, about India, and about Indians. So I felt here was this gap in the writing of our history that needed to be filled. And this book is an attempt to fill that gap.
I totally agree. You know, I have always wondered why there has been a collective. I have also, heard you somewhere mentioning that there has been a collective amnesia on the very fact what he's written in Mein Kampf. You know, it is one of the bestseller books still in India. And there are parts which either people skip or they don't even get to that. Why do you think there is a collective amnesia? I mean, this is something, Hitler is not a very, not a very easy character to forgive or forget. But why didn't we talk about this? Why didn't we talk about his views on Hitler before, on India before? That would have touched a lot of nationalists, I'm sure. Earlier, if somebody had taken up this task instead of you much earlier and talked about Hitler's viewpoints. Yeah.
That's a very good question that you asked, Neeta. There are four or five reasons I feel we have developed this collective loss of memory about Adolf Hitler and his opinion of India.
Yes.
The first reason is that we have somewhere in our mind's eye the image and the photograph of Hitler shaking hands with Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose in Berlin.
Yeah.
The second thing we have in our minds is that Hitler fought against the British in the Second World War. Now, because of Netaji's meeting with Hitler and Hitler's battle against the British in the Second World War, we have jumped to the conclusion that Hitler was a wholehearted supporter of the Indian freedom struggle. But that is a completely fallacious assumption, as I have comprehensively shown in my book. These two reasons are extremely important. These two images that are stuck in our heads. The third reason is the swastika, a symbol that the Nazis used on their flag. It was an emblem of the Nazis. They had actually inverted the swastika. It is not used by the Nazis the way the Hindus or other communities across the world use it. But because he used the swastika, we believe that he was an admirer of Indian culture and civilization. He was a supporter of our freedom struggle. So that reinforces our beliefs. There is a fourth reason for it. The word Aryan, which is thrown about very loosely by Hitler all the time.
Yeah.
And because the origin of the word Aryan is from the Sanskrit word Arya, we believe that Hitler must have thought that Indians are Aryans and Indians are the pure blood Aryans. But again, as I have shown in detail in my book, Hitler thought exactly the opposite. His idea of Aryanness had nothing to do with us. It was a very warped idea where he believed that the Nordic race or the white race was destined to rule the earth. And the Indians were not at all Aryan, in fact, but they were un-Aryan and they were racially unfit and they were racially inferior.
That's what he felt.
Yeah. He looked at everything through a racial lens. And when he looked at Indians through that lens, we simply did not qualify. The Nazi newspaper referred to Indians at one point in time, as I have written in my book, and I have written other examples also of Nazi descriptions of Indians. The Nazi paper described Indians as subhuman. My book has revealed, perhaps for the first time, that a number of Indians were harassed and persecuted in Nazi Germany. And in fact, the harassment and persecution began as soon as Hitler came to power in Nazi Germany. So these are the reasons that we are stuck with this notion, this utterly mistaken notion that Hitler was a supporter of the Indian people. He fought against the British. He took up the swastika symbol. He spoke about the word Aryan. So he was with India and he was with Netaji. But the fact is that Hitler never really wanted to fight the British. Hitler wanted to neatly divide the world into 2 or 3 big spheres of influences. One sphere was to be ruled by the British, and India was to be a part of that sphere. Another sphere would be ruled by Nazi Germany, where Germany would rule across Europe and across Asia. And very importantly, British rule is considered as a model by Hitler for Nazi Germany to emulate. the emulation is about how to enslave a population. So Hitler says that Nazi Germany should enslave the Russians just the way the British have enslaved India. So he looked at us as a model for enslavement, not as Aryans.
So, right. Yeah, you were saying something? I interfered.
I was about to conclude that
yes,
these are the reasons that we feel that he supported India, but he has exactly the opposite idea about us. And we better find out about this idea as soon as possible.
No, absolutely. I totally agree. In fact, Mein Kampf, his autobiography, as I just mentioned before, it remains a popular read. But tell me, I mean, after I read your book, I suddenly looked at this autobiography, which I had read a long time back, with a very, very different feeling. So how do you feel about it? I mean, do you even want to look at his autobiography now after finding so many facts about him and his feelings about India now? I mean, when you see, yeah.
To be very frank, Hitler's autobiography is completely unreadable, in the sense that it's a very slow book. He has all kinds of very strange theories about race and the development of race and the mixing of various races. He has very wrong notions about how history has developed in societies across the world. And he has similarly wrong notions about India and how India developed and how Indian civilization took shape, how Indian culture developed. And he brings forth these notions of his without being truly informed in any sense of the term. Informed, he's not informed at all. He's completely ignorant about Indian civilization, about India. For instance, there is one point in the book where I have described his meeting with Lord Halifax, who was Lord Irwin in India, and he was the Viceroy of India, and he ruled India as its most important ruler, the Viceroy, for several years, and had many important meetings with Gandhi, Nehru, and other big leaders. And we are very much aware of the famous Gandhi-Irwin Pact of 1931 in our national history. But Hitler, in his meeting with Lord Halifax or Lord Irwin, he gives him an unsolicited suggestion on how to deal with what he describes as the Indian problem. He says you can deal with this Indian problem very easily. And there are some very shocking things that he tells him. So he has very fanciful notions about India, about the rest of the world. The book is thoroughly unreadable. It is slow, plodding. The sentences are, very long-winded. And one of the reasons we are largely ignorant about what Hitler said about India, despite the best-selling nature of Mein Kampf, is that we Indians never really, most of us have not even reached the point in the book where he talks about India. I think most of us give up reading the book much before that.
Yes, after 25%. Yes, you're so right about this bestseller tag that it has, and I think the very fact that people get very inquisitive about reading about him. So how many years did it take you to write this book? Because it is quite a comprehensive, well-researched book. So I'm sure there's been a lot of hard work that you've done for the book and, in writing it.
It took me close to 10 years to write this book, because I had to dig really deep into the archives. A lot of things that Hitler said and wrote about India and Indians are not available in his published writings and speeches. Now, Mein Kampf is just one example, one small example of that. But other than that, there are many things that are not really in the public domain, but they are hidden in the archives. A lot of the stuff was available in the German language. And I had to go through a hell of a lot of documents and get those documents translated. These archives were archives of the Third Reich. During the years when Hitler was in power, those 12 years from 1933 to 1945. Then there were also the years before Hitler came to power. So right from the time that Hitler was a struggling political agitator in Munich in the early 1920s, he was making all kinds of remarks about India and British rule in India and India's demand for self-rule. And all of those remarks are in his unpublished writings, which are there in the German archive. So you really have to dig up those files. So I had to get a lot of that stuff translated. Right through the 1920s, on various occasions, he talks about Indians. So all of this material of his comments about India, whether he makes it during his meetings with Indian leaders or Indian students or his own party colleagues. Now my book talks about one meeting that he has with a Nazi party colleague, where there is a huge argument about the colonized people's demand for independence. And he makes his case against India's case for freedom in that meeting very passionately with this party colleague of his. So all of that's there, but it's hidden. So I had to really dig deep to get into that. I had to look up a lot of the British archives, parliamentary records, as well as the press archives, as well as individual papers of some of the British leaders, in order to understand how the British responded to the persecution and harassment of Indians in Nazi Germany. Because we must remember that Indians were under British rule at that time. So the British had the authority to ask Nazi Germany about those cases. As my book reveals, some Indians were put into prison, they were harassed, they were persecuted, they were beaten up, in fact. And the issue came up in the British Parliament. Some public-spirited and truly well-meaning British parliamentarians raised the issue. And there were exchanges, there were communications between Nazi Germany and the British parliamentarians. And all of that material is also lying hidden in the British parliamentary archives and elsewhere in Britain. Surprisingly, I found that the Indian archives have a great deal of material too.
Okay.
So when Hitler was making these denunciatory and anti-India remarks at various points in his career, very interestingly, Indians were reacting to those remarks. So Indians who were alive during that period, and not only our national leaders, Subhash Chandra Bose was among the ones to protest the most against India, Hitler's anti-India remarks and attitudes and his persecution of Indians in Nazi Germany. And so did other Indians, protest against the Nazi regime. But interestingly, there were ordinary Indians who wrote to newspapers, to letters to the editor, to newspapers, protesting against what Hitler was saying about India and Indians. So this collective loss of memory has happened in the post-independence year. And his contemporaries who were Indians were completely aware of what Hitler thought about India and about Indians.
So right, I must show
everybody. So the point is, I had to look up a lot of material and gather material and work on the book. So it took about a decade.
No, I've read the book and I realized the kind of hard work this has gone, because you've really put down some really unknown facts, and this is the book that we're talking about. It does look quite slim, but then content wise it's quite heavy. You have to go through to realize the hard work Weber has put in. All this, that the hard work that you've seen, but still when we talk about the amnesia part, we also talk about the fact that I was reading somewhere, and I've also noticed it myself, that from maybe coffee mugs and laptop cases to maybe ice creams and artworks, everything does sell in the name of Hitler. And sometime back, I remember a publisher also grabbed quite a few eyeballs when he, wrote a book in which among the greatest leaders, he mentioned Hitler's name. And also you had the grandson of Subhash Chandra Bose saying that Hitler was a nationalist who never betrayed his country. So, and also I, noticed recently when there was a restaurant, which I think the name got pulled down, Hitler's Cross, where some Jews had problems with that. So how do you react to such behavior when you, more than anyone else, know the correct story behind this and correct feelings behind this?
See, I think the easy way out would be to blame the Indian people. but the truth is much more complex.
Hmm.
Hitler has been to an extent normalized in India, though he hasn't been normalized elsewhere in the world.
Yeah.
I don't think any German or Britain in their right thinking minds or in their right minds would name a place after him or a person after him or a restaurant after him. But we do. That's because one of the reasons for it is, one, of course, we have already discussed, is our collective loss of memory. The second is, I think we've had very few spells of authoritarian rule in post-independence India. We have really enjoyed our democracy in that sense. The only time an emergency was nationally imposed in India, those 2 years, the Indian people resoundingly rejected that imposition of emergency in the subsequent elections.
Yeah.
So it would be far too simplistic to say that Indians like dictators. No, it's not like that. It's not so simple as that. We are making it far too simple by saying things like that. But there is a normalizing, and that is because of our experience with democracy. See, democracy is necessarily messy. It creates a lot of hurdles. As we see the difference between China and India and the development works that they get done, as opposed to the works that we get done at our pace. It's much easier to get things done in a dictatorship. And we have not experienced the ruthless nature of a dictatorship to the extent that some other societies have, which is why they are very wary of the word dictator. Whereas we have a certain kind of curiosity, and you use the correct word, which is inquisitive. We are inquisitive about the whole thing. And that's because we haven't experienced it enough. If we were to experience it over in fact, God forbid, I'm quite glad we have not experienced it.
Yeah.
If we had experienced it if we had had regular spells of dictatorship, I don't think we would have normalized Hitler to the extent we have. And a connected reason is our frustration with red tapeism and bureaucracy and the failure of our system at successive points in time and across decades. Indian democracy, to be fair to the critics of democracy, has been far too slow moving, even by democracy standards. And our democratic institutions are still underdeveloped. So in the last 7 decades, if we had developed our democratic institutions in a proper manner, we would have not normalized Hitler like this. But red tape has come in the way, bureaucracy has come in the way. And there are times when the ordinary Indian feels, correctly so, that, I wish there were an iron hand. Now, I am saying correctly so for the simple reason that for the ordinary Indian citizen, it means speed of decision making and getting things done and getting the right things done without corruption, without graft. But the flip side of it, and the far more dangerous side of it, is authoritarianism. And if it sets in a real way, and if we see a ruthless dictatorship, then I don't think we would ever normalize a phenomenon like Adolf Hitler. But I would also blame our academia, our political culture, our lack of intellectual exercises to bring the horrors of such regimes to light. I think we should have already been discussing Hitler and his views about India
long time back,
a long time ago, as you yourself pointed out earlier in your conversation.
Yeah.
And so our academia has to blame, our political culture is to blame, our intelligentsia has to blame, we in the media are to blame to a certain extent, because we have to direct the conversation in a certain direction as well. And we are feeding into this popular narrative of Hitler, as a very normal kind of guy with this, and we have the great dictator image in our mind, as if it's some cartoon thing that's going on.
Yes.
So I think the greater the awareness, I think the sooner will be the realization that this normalizing has not been correct.
Yeah. And also, yeah, and the way the history books have been written, and that we have gone multiple times over.
Correct.
Coming to your book, we all know that Mahatma Gandhi and Adolf Hitler, they have been one of the two most dominant personalities of 20th century. And they've been totally opposite in their philosophy, in their action, the way they look towards their outlook towards violence, non-violence. And they have, in their own respect, changed the course of history. They never met each other. But Mahatma Gandhi tried pacifying him, tried to make him understand through these two letters that
Right.
he wrote to him, and and also referred to him as a friend. So why do you think Hitler was not at all fond of Gandhiji? I mean, he was totally against him. Was it because he was totally against, totally opposite to him in philosophy and action, or the ideological differences they had? So why do you think he hated him so much? What was this hatred part? Yeah. And he also talked about shooting Gandhi, and you mentioned that. I mean, what was that so much against Gandhi that Gandhiji he had?
See, Gandhi was just too much of an extreme case for Adolf Hitler, for someone like Hitler, because the essence of Hitler's politics was political violence and ruthless political violence. The Nazi party grew by breaking the heads of its opponents. So in the 1920s, Hitler and his opponents, the communists and the socialists and the others, they were literally breaking beer bottles on each other's heads in the beer halls of Munich and in other places. And Hitler was a firm believer in political violence in order to make political progress. And he believed in serious violence, even in murder. And he started this culture of, well, he did not start it. It already existed, but he thrived on that culture of political violence and political murder and political assassination. And after he came to power, he in fact eliminated many of his very close colleagues and close aides in his party, like Ernst Röhm and other very close challengers to his authority within the party, as early as the year 1934. Now, in 1934, Hitler has been just 1 year in power, but he just starts eliminating, killing his rivals, including somebody very close to him like Röhm, who has led the party in a big way. Yeah. And then he eliminates people from time to time. And later, as we know, as Nazi Germany demonstrated in a very chilling fashion during the World War, he eliminates millions of Jews. And his political rivals he has killed, his political aides he has killed, his supporters he has killed, whoever he has suspected he has killed or beaten up or thrashed. The Nazis destroyed so many German establishments, shops, offices, all kinds of things, just because they belong to Jews. They beat up Indians like A.C.N. Nambiar, like Sarojini Naidu's son, Jayasuriya Naidu, D.G. Tendulkar, and others in Berlin, just because they didn't like us. We were brown people, and he also suspected these Indians of being communist sympathizers and communist activists. So he got them thrashed. So here is a guy who is a serious believer in pointless violence, in fact. And that is combined with his racial hatred and contempt for Indians. Because he thinks Indians are racially inferior and unfit, he gets even more wild in his anger for Gandhi. So he says, on the one hand, this guy is completely, racially unfit. Who is he to tell us things? And, why is he becoming so popular? So he gets, and on top of that, Gandhi is preaching non-violence, which Hitler thinks is some unimaginable kind of dealing with your political rivals. So it's a combination of racial hatred and Gandhi as an extreme case of non-violence.
So right. So right at the same time, despite of his opinion about Gandhiji, he still, he was a big fan of Indian hockey legend Dhyan Chand. Germany's loss to India in 1936 Olympics made Hitler reach out to Dhyan Chand, and he wanted him to be in German army. So I think he was quite a contradictory character at times. But fact remains, and I am coming to my last question now because I would like the interactive audience to get on after this. That the fact remains that Bose wanted Nazi Germany to help him for independence movement. So was it the fact that enemy of an enemy is a friend, and was it too much of political realism into it? So what do you think about it? Because Bose has always been, looked upon that, yes, he was shaking hands, as we just mentioned in the beginning of a conversation. There's this picture which is immensely popular, and we see that quite often. So why do you think Bose reached out to Hitler, despite all his fallouts?
Yeah. Before I answer that question, could I talk about Dhyan Chand a bit?
Yes, please. Yeah.
It is a complete falsehood that Hitler was an admirer of Dhyan Chand.
Okay.
It's a lie that he offered Dhyan Chand a position in the German army. He did nothing of the kind. That is just one of the myths that Indians have spread in post-independence India.
Okay.
And one of the chapters in my book, in fact, demolishes that myth. And we have somehow perpetuated that myth that, Dhyan Chand, he admired Dhyan Chand, he was a fan, nothing of the sort. He didn't want brown people getting into the Berlin Olympics at all. That is why he didn't want the Berlin Olympics to take place at all in 1936. But he was forced to do that because it was the previous government which had been taken the rights for Germany for the Olympics, and it was going to be impossible to cancel these because it was an international event. It was going to be impossible to say no at the last moment. But then Hitler decided to convert it into an opportunity for propaganda. But my book makes it very clear and establishes that he never offered Dhyan Chand a position in the German army, and he was not an admirer of Dhyan Chand. In fact, Dhyan Chand at no point in time in his life refers to his meeting with Hitler. He mentions that he saw Hitler only from a distance.
Didn't even give him the salute in the Hitler salute.
No, there's no question of any meeting with Hitler and Hitler praising him at all. He never did anything of the sort. Yeah. If Hitler had praised him, there's no way nobody would have written about it. And certainly Dhyan Chand would have written about it in his autobiography. Because he mentions people like Goring, whose medals on his chest the Indian hockey team was admiring. Dhyan Chand writes about it. And imagine Dhyan Chand not writing about a meeting with Hitler, and not a single Indian player, there's no record of it. From where we plucked this theory out of out of the air, I don't know, but we seem to have got it with us. So it's not true. But I hope that my book helps to establish that it's not.
Yes. Many such myths have been broken in your book, definitely. And that's the reason why everyone should read it. I was coming to that. Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you for your kind words.
Yeah.
To get to the delicate question about Netaji Bose.
Yes.
Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was completely consumed with the idea of independence for India. And he was obsessed with this idea. And it was because of his obsession with the idea that he sought Nazi Germany's support for India's freedom struggle. It is important to note that Bose was not a supporter or admirer of Nazi Germany or of Hitler. From time to time, Bose very strongly criticized Hitler and the Nazi regime. As I mentioned earlier, he protested against the unjust treatment of Indians in Germany. He wrote memorandums to the Nazi government, including to Hitler, protesting about his remarks in Mein Kampf, protesting about the treatment meted out to Indian students in Berlin and other parts of Germany by the Nazi regime. And he criticizes Hitler also in the year 1938 when he's president of the Indian National Congress for Nazi Germany's aggression against Czechoslovakia and other places like Austria. Now, what happens is that when World War II breaks out, by that time, Hitler is an immensely powerful figure across the world. And right through the 1930s, even the British were trying to appease Hitler. And when the British and Hitler were ranged against each other in the World War, the thought that arose in Bose's mind was, why not take the help of our enemy's enemy? He's hugely powerful. Nobody is able to stop him. In the Munich Pact of 1938, he has gained so much. They have given in to him completely. They've surrendered to him. He is fully aware of the fact that the Nazis are a completely negative force. But he thinks to himself, Nazi energies could perhaps be used in a positive direction or could be channelized in a positive direction so that some good things could be done. And he sees a golden opportunity for India there to fight against the British when Hitler is fighting against them and to throw them out of India. And that is why he seeks Hitler's support for Indian independence. But he's completely aware of the fact that Hitler is not pro-India. That Hitler has this hatred and racial contempt for Indians. And like my book establishes, even during the meeting with Hitler, the one-on-one meeting that he has with Hitler, the only meeting that he has with Hitler, he actually brings up the issue of Hitler's anti-India comments in Mein Kampf, and he asks him to delete those comments. Now that requires a tremendous amount of integrity and courage and a sense of commitment to India. And it just shows his commitment to this country. Because Hitler was extremely powerful at that point in time. We must remember, even in the World War, in the first 2 years, Nazi Germany just rode roughshod over everybody. And they had a string of successes in the war in the early years. It was only after September and October 1941, when the Nazis entered Russia, that the Nazis really got stuck there. And they started getting one kind of setback after another. But before that, Hitler was hugely successful even in the war. And he was still successful and the war had certainly not been decided when Bose met him. Bose brings up the issue of Hitler's perception of India in his meeting with Hitler. So Bose certainly looks at him as an enemy's enemy. And we must keep another thing in mind. We must keep the overall context in mind. And also another thing is that when we look at the Hitler regime today, we are fully aware of all its horrors. During those years, there wasn't full information available about what Hitler had done to Jews after the start of the war. All of that came out only after the war years. First during the Nuremberg trials after the war, and then increasingly so in the later decades. In fact, today we know a lot more about Nazi Germany and about Hitler than his contemporaries knew at that point in time. That is why a number of Indian leaders, and Bose is not the only one, make mistakes about Hitler from time to time, as I have again shown in my book about the Indian entanglements with Hitler.
Separate chapter.
Bose is not the only one. So I would certainly reject the perception that Bose was a Nazi collaborator. Yes, it was a misjudgment. There's no doubt about that. But there were many other Indians who made misjudgments about Hitler, including Mahatma Gandhi, as I have shown in my book. Nehru made misjudgments about Stalin. So did Savarkar, Golwalkar about Hitler, and Bose, the left-wing leader, about Hitler as well. So people across the ideological spectrum, from hardcore left-wingers to hardcore right-wingers, are making, very mistaken assumptions about Adolf Hitler at that point in time. But, it's easy to sit in judgment now from a
Oh,
21st century point of view.
yeah.
They were operating in their own context, and I think we need to keep that context in mind.
Absolutely. I totally agree with the contextual part of it because that's been so long ago and we don't know, you're right, what were these circumstances, how much of communication was coming in. And we are definitely communication-wise much more richer right now. I'll immediately move on to my interactive
True.
round. I have Jayavardhan Dedish. He's there with us today. He's a student of geography and Indian classical vocalist, and he's got keen interest in politics and international relations. And he's an avid reader of politically and historically correct books. Yes, over to you, Jay.
Thank you. Namaskar and good evening, sir. It's good to see you and
Hi,
interact
Jay.
with you.
You can call me Vaibhav, not sir.
Okay, okay, sir. Still, it's the jargon like these days, so let it be. So my question would be regarding something that we have already discussed earlier about the usage of the swastika as the symbol of the Nazi Germany after basically the failure of Treaty of Versailles, right? So as the swastika is the symbol of good fortune throughout our Sanatan culture, but throughout the world, it is still seen as a synonym with fascism, right? And this idea was even like I keep on reading the books, so this idea was even seized upon by some anti-Semitic nationalist groups who appropriated that swastika as an Aryan symbol to boost a sense of ancient lineage for the Germanic people. And Jews still see this as symbol of hate and Holocaust. So what was the main reason behind the Hitler's Nazi Germany using this symbol particularly in Indian context?
I think, Jay, one thing that we need to bear in mind is that while the swastika is a sacred symbol in Hinduism and in India, it is an equally sacred symbol across the world in various cultures. And on various continents, it has been a sacred symbol. So it was one of the sacred symbols in Europe too. And it was a symbol that the Nazi party and Hitler associated with the Aryan race. Now, as we know, they believe that the Aryans, the Nordic race, the white man, as Hitler called it, described it, the white man on their horses, they left Europe and they conquered various continents. At some point, they came to India and they mixed with the local population and they went across the world. And at some point in time, they picked up this symbol and made it their own. So Hitler was not at all willing to concede that this symbol belonged to India or to any other culture in the world. He believed it to be an Aryan symbol, which was essentially Germanic and Nordic and a symbol of the white race. So he's not really picking up an Indian symbol. See, in our heads, he's picking up an Indian symbol, but in his head, he's picking up a European symbol and a symbol of the white race. And we really have no notion or no indication, it's not even available in Hitler's writings or speeches or in the Nazi party works, where that notion comes into his head. Because all kinds of Nazi theories are so distorted that you often have very little idea about where those theories are coming from. You see? So they believe that the Aryans went to India and they took those symbols there. They do not believe that they took the symbol from India. They believe that the Aryans were carrying the symbol and they took it across the world. So our approach is fundamentally a contrasting approach. We believe that swastika went out from India to Germany, and Hitler believes that the swastika was carried to India by the Aryans who entered India and then mixed with the local population, and then the Aryans who had entered India lost their Aryan character because they were mingling and mixing with these so-called subhumans, as they called us. So that's what the approach is. His approach is that symbol doesn't belong to us at all. In fact, he would be very angry that we are using the symbol.
Okay, sir. Got my answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jay.
But
Next
as
we
to,
have,
sorry, I'm sorry, Neil, but as to the exact origin of the idea, well, Hitler has not made it clear that this is where he got it from, but it came from one of the racial theories that Arthur Gobineau, I've mentioned in the book, Arthur Gobineau and other people propagated about Aryan philosophy.
Thank you, Jay. Next we have Mr. Vijay Shankar. He's an advocate, history honors, and deeply interested in history and literature.
Good evening, sir. Many, many congratulations for the book. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, clearly, absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Sir, I have two questions, if you permit me. My first question is that Hitler's racism towards India or any other non-white population was not something isolated. It was isolated. In fact, British, who ruled us for almost 200 years, they also went on to translate the same hatred towards the Indians everywhere, like in public places, in parks, in say the clubs, strictly European, in railway compartments as well. So, so why is it that we take the instance of Hitler's hatred for Indians? Like we have been ruled by one of the most racially prejudiced colonizers, and many of our freedom fighters, many of our leaders proudly proclaimed themselves to be the loyal subjects of the British Empire, one of the most racist empires of the world. So how do you explain that? And my second question, if you permit me, my second question is,
please.
All said and done, it was Hitler who brought the Germans their self-respect back, and almost every other power, be it the US, be it the UK, be it Russia, every other power went out of the way to appease him till he started till he started the Second World War. How that can be explained?
So, Mr. Vijay Shankar, you are absolutely right in saying that the British were racist. I would be the last person to say that Hitler stood in isolation. No, the British were as racist as Hitler was. But we do talk about British racism. We do talk about Winston Churchill's comments about India and Indians. We do talk about the fact that they left us out of European clubs and all of the other things that you mentioned. You correctly mentioned all of these things. There is absolutely no doubt about that. But we are acutely aware of their racism. Whereas about Hitler, we have somehow assumed that racism did not exist when it came to India. It may have existed when it came to Jews, and he had a hatred for Jews. But about the Indian people, we seem to believe that he was a supporter of India. And that is the whole idea of this book, that this is a forgotten chapter of India's history that we better know about, and then we better refresh our memories about. So I'm not at all speaking of Hitler in isolation. And you will note in my, if you go through, I hope you go through my book, that I'm talking about Churchill as well. But we do discuss Churchill so much. We do discuss the British races so much. And is there any doubt about the fact that the British treated Indians very shabbily, that they ruled over us for God knows how many years, and their policies resulted in the deaths and massacres of so many people? There is absolutely no doubt about that thing. And their fundamental idea, though they said that Indians needed to be civilized, that is why they were here, but they wanted India's wealth and resources, and they looted India. Is there any doubt about it? No, there's no doubt about it. But we do discuss about all of this. Whereas, do we discuss Hitler? No, we discuss him only in a positive way. We somehow believe that he solidly stood with us in our demand for Indian freedom, whereas he's consistently advising the British not to give us our freedom. Well, that is one of the revelations in my book, that he's constantly telling the British, do not give these Indians their freedom. But we do not talk about this. We do not talk about his racism towards Indians. We have completely forgotten, or overlooked rather, what he has written about Indians in what is his autobiography, a very famous and, like we said at the beginning, hugely popular in book in India. So that is my answer to your question. I completely agree with you about the British. There's no question about it. There was only a difference of degree between Hitler and Churchill in their racism. The British were a little less crude in their racism. They could appear a little bit sophisticated, but the intention was the same.
Right.
To get to your second question, he made Germany powerful. Yes, he did make Germany powerful for a certain period of time. There is no doubt about it. After he came to power, a number of people in Germany got jobs. The unemployment drastically reduced. Germany became a powerful force in Europe. There is no doubt about it. See, it's not about black and white. I'm not at all speaking in black and white terms. These are complex subjects, right? And we have to look at both sides. What is correct is correct. What's not correct is correct. Is not correct. So, but when we talk about the reduction in employment in Nazi Germany and Germans getting their self-respect back, let us look at the eventual consequences of the Third Reich also. Germany was destroyed by the war. It was globally isolated. Millions of people died. Millions of Germans died. We don't, because we do not teach our history properly in our country, we have also completely lost sight of the fact that after the end of the Nazi regime, after the end of the World War II, when the American forces and Russian forces entered Germany, Germans were treated very badly. Ordinary Germans, they were harassed, they were tortured, women were raped and killed. One estimate by scholars is that about 3 lakh women were raped by American and Russian soldiers who entered Germany after the end of the World War. So ultimately, what Hitler's arrogance and hubris resulted in was the total ruin of Germany. And I think we need to keep both these things in mind, that Hitler succeeded, no doubt about it, up to a point. And then he grew so arrogant that he believed he could do anything and get away with it. And it resulted in the destruction of an entire society, of an entire generation of German culture and civilization, and also the kind of badnami that happened across the world. They became notorious, and Germany became a bad word. And I think those consequences are also what we need to bear in mind. So both things, the ones you stated, are correct, and Germany's eventual destruction, both are correct. And these are lessons to be learned from history.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks.
I'm looking forward for reading your book.
Yes.
And congratulations once again, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have Mr. Nikhil Pandya now. He's into real estate and he's an avid reader, loves traveling to historical places. This is the last question we are going to take in the interactive. Thank you, Nikhil.
Yes, Mr. Weber, how are you, first of all?
I'm fine, Nikhil. How are you?
Yes, I'm fine. My question is only for that. Has Mr. Adolf Hitler support Indian freedom struggle or Indian revolutionary during the pre-independence?
I have looked into that question, and in our discussion, we have dealt with that question, that Hitler did not support India's case for freedom, India's cause for freedom as well. So he said they had no case for freedom in the first place, no argument to be made for freedom because they didn't deserve it at all. And he did not support our cause for freedom as well. So when Mussolini and other people are also urging him to support India's cause for freedom and India's struggle for freedom, he rejects that demand. He says, no, I will not support. When Netaji Bose repeatedly asks for an Axis declaration in support of Indian freedom, the only leader who holds it back and rejects it is Adolf Hitler. Mussolini agrees, the others agree. But he doesn't agree because he does not want India to get her independence. And in fact, he thinks that British rule in India is good. And like I mentioned earlier, Britain and Germany should divide the world between themselves. And India should be ruled by the British because that's what the Indians deserve. They don't deserve self-rule. And Russia should be ruled by the Germans. And Russia will be Germany's India, he said. So Russia was for him, so British rule was for him a model for Nazi Germany. So he does not do that. And if you look at here I'm just telling you a few things, but there are a lot more details in my book about how he consistently argues against the Indian desire for independence and the Indian struggle for independence. From time to time, he argues with Indian politicians, he argues with the Indian media persons, he argues with his own party colleagues. Like I mentioned, the discussion he had with a very close aide of his, and he flew into a rage, and he said, how can you, support their and demand for freedom? So he's opposing it. Now people are going to tell you that at the end, Nazi Germany signed that declaration in favor of Indian independence. There is a point at which he signed it, and that was when the war was well and truly lost. He had no option but to sign it because he had to get support from wherever it was going to be possible. So after years of blocking that statement or that declaration for in support of Indian freedom, he finally signed it towards the end of the World War, when Nazi Germany had more or less lost the war, and Hitler himself was in his Berlin bunker and about to commit suicide in that bunker, as we know.
Thank you, Nikhil. Lovely. Thank you, Weber, for a comprehensive portrait of Hitler's outlook on India and its people, his opinion of their struggle against the British Raj, and his take on Indian history, culture, and civilization. Thank you so much for gracing our platform. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Neeta, for inviting me, and to all the participants and listeners and those who asked questions. It was indeed an honor and a delight to be here.
Thank you.
On this platform.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, totally. And the book Hitler and India, written by Weber, has been published by Westland, and it is available on Amazon. And thanks to Shweta from Westland for making this session possible. So once again, thank you, audience, for being there and believing in us. See you next. And the recording of this session will be available in the next few days on our channel, Trends Events. Please do subscribe. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.